We're here today on the anniversary of the 7/7 bombings in Tavistock Square. In 2010, we made a series of films for landofthefree.co.uk called 7/7 Revisited with Dr. Nick Colostrum and ex-MI5 officer David Shayler. We're here with both Dave and Nick today in Tavistock Square as a state Machiavellian terror still continues.
Okay, here we are on the 8th anniversary of the London bombing in Tavistock Square, and I'm with David Shayler, who worked for 5 years as a MI5 officer, and he's wrote a book about his experience, and he's written another book now about Ian Paddock and affairs with the police.
Hello there.
Right. Now I want to talk to David about terror striking London again, which he did in Woolwich on the 22nd last month, and what he thinks of it. This is the first major terror event since the London bombings. David?
Yeah, I mean, we now seem to have a different understanding of what's going on. In the past, we used to talk about false flag operations, in which there were massive events like 9/11 or 7/7, in which there were do appear to be many fatalities. What we seem to have now moved on to is the age of the staged event. And let's be clear what we mean by this. These events that take place, that are reported in mainstream media, there doesn't appear to be any evidence for them. And when you look, you start to find all sorts of evidence of things like people who are registered with Crisis Actors Guild and things like this. And the examples we're thinking of here is things like the Sandy Hook massacre, which happened in December last year, and the Boston Marathon bombings, but also it seems to apply to the Woolwich bombings as well.
Right. Okay, so we seem to have actors, street theatre, but with the Woolwich event, there was one real death. Would you agree, David? Drummer Lee Rigby really was alive before, and the tragedy of his death was used to give this whole street theatre credibility.
Yeah, I think with all of these things, it's too early to say that no one died. I think people did die, and obviously our thoughts are with the families of those people. But our thoughts are also with them in terms of wanting to get justice for their loved ones. And if these are staged events, as the evidence seems to point to, they are not doing those people any service by covering that up, whether they're relatives or not, basically.
Yeah. So what people were shown in the street in Woolwich, Artillery Road, just by the Royal Artillery Barracks, wasn't the body of drummer Lee Rigby, was it, David? I mean, there's not a drop of real blood anywhere, and he wasn't really killed in that manner, or was he?
Well, if the initial witness reports talked about a beheading, they slightly backtracked after that to say they tried to hack his head off. But either way, if this guy really was attacked with knives and a meat cleaver, there's going to be blood all over the place. And there doesn't seem to be blood. I mean, when you see the initial shots from the helicopter, there doesn't seem to be blood on the ground. In some later shots, there does seem to be blood. So the blood from the helicopter, but not in other shots. So again, that's slightly curious. But given the fact that they're supposed to have hacked this guy's head off, or part of it off, there should be tons and tons of blood. There should also be blood on Michael Abouleo, who's actually standing in front of the camera, supposedly with a meat cleaver and supposedly with hands covered in blood. Now again, when you look at his hands, it's very curious about the blood on his hands. It appears to be rather evenly spread over his hands, as if he's gone like this and wiped it all over his hands, or if it's perhaps been superimposed afterwards. Yeah. Now again, we're not coming to any firm conclusions here, but it does appear to be that when you slow the videos down. It could be a problem obviously with the video quality, but nevertheless, if you slow those videos down, they appear to leave red trails on the film, basically, which would suggest that isn't real blood. And certainly the fact there's no blood on their clothing. And again, if this guy really has hacked someone's head off, you'd expect him to show some kind of human reaction to that. Contrary to what we see in Hollywood movies, people, when they attack another human being, your heart rate goes up, you're full of adrenaline and so on. This guy is slightly angry, but he's pretty calm otherwise.
Yeah, right. And would you agree that the climax of this street theatre, you've got 3 bodies on the ground. The 2 alleged terrorists are lying, one on the road, the other on the pavement, and then DLR drummer Lee Rigby is also apparently lying on the road. Would you agree there's not a single drop of blood on any of those bodies or around those bodies?
Yeah, again, there doesn't seem to be enough blood considering what's supposed to have happened, basically. And the whole problem is with that, I mean, I've seen the video of you going down there and you see how busy that road is. So it begs the question first, how do they get the car across the road onto the pavement? But then it must beg the question that the traffic must have been stopped. Otherwise, you would presume people driving past would stop if they saw somebody having their head hacked off. So there should be a row of cars there, and there's not. There's one white lorry, and again, this lorry is unmarked. It appears to have been caught in the footage, and we would obviously be entitled to suspect that was some part of the setup, basically. And again, we saw this on 7/7, and you saw the picture of the bus. Next to it is a van that belonged to a company called Kingstar, who had an expertise in difficult controlled demolitions. So they were caught out there. This time they obviously got an unmarked van, so they're not caught out in the same way.
Yeah. Okay, I'm interested in you making a comparison with the London bombings, Dave. There were really a whole lot of dead people and a whole lot of really aggrieved families. We seem to be moving on now, maybe with Sandy Hook and the Boston bombings, in which, as you say, there may not be real death. We're left the haunting feeling, is this just all a show? And likewise with the Woolwich event, which provoked such terrific national grief and horror, was it just a show? Has the nature of state-fabricated terror changed, that they don't somehow avoid real deaths now?
Yeah, I think that we know that they constantly change their game, they're constantly learning lessons, and obviously a lot of people did die on 9/11, a lot of people did die on 7/7. That creates a lot of very aggrieved families who want answers to questions. And, they can rebut people like us, they can call us all sorts of things, they can say we're nuts, conspiracy theorists, whatever, but if you've got an aggrieved family member, it's very difficult to avoid their questions and their quest for truth. So they seem to have learned from that, and either they're keeping the fatalities down to a bare minimum, and I do think that drummer Lee Rigby did die, so there is a genuine aggrieved family there, but that's only one family. One family can be very easily marshalled by them. If they were to read some of the stuff we're talking about, they'd have somebody coming in saying, don't be stupid, don't listen to those conspiracy theorists, just don't listen to that kind of thing. When you've got lots of families, that's much more difficult. So they seem to have adopted a new tactic of staged events. Now, I think 7/7 was, in some ways, aspects of 7/7. I'm not saying people didn't die then, but I'm saying that aspects of 7/7 appear to have been staged. Obviously, shortly after 7/7, we saw the famous picture taken at 7:21 outside Luton Station of the 4 alleged bombers together. Right. Now, that was the only information we had of those guys at Luton for many, many years. But during the inquest, when I was actually writing something about this, I checked it, there weren't any pictures there. In between me checking it and publishing what I was actually about to publish, these actual images appeared, which are supposed to be taken off CCTV of them going through Luton Station. Now, what we all remember, of course, was the practice run in June of that year, basically.
Right, yeah.
And what I think they've done is taken the pictures from the practice run and superimposed them on a video saying, with the time date stamp of 7/75, the date of the attack. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because the pictures of the June practice run are so much clearer than the ones we've got from 7/7. Now, did those cameras suddenly start to degrade in a couple of weeks? Yeah. Or is it the fact that we all know that if you try to Photoshop something, it's much easier to make it look convincing when you've got a very blurry picture than when it is when you've got a relatively crystal clear one?
Yeah, but Dave, how come the CCTV always seems to go off whenever big state terror events are happening? I mean, this event we're looking at now at Woolwich, the car must have made a very dramatic crossover of the road, climbing up onto the pavement, going along the pavement and knocking over this drummer in a very surreal and hard to believe manner. And obviously that would have been picked up by the CCTV cameras at each end of this road. How come that wasn't working? Does it remind us of how 9/11, the Boston CCTV at airports were not working? Does it remind us of how maybe when Lady Di was bumped off in Paris, the CCTVs went out? I mean, what happens to these cameras?
Well, I say it's enormously suspicious that when I say there are these suspicious lefts, like Diana, like around the Pentagon, for example, as well. There's no CCTV around the Pentagon, and London is the most surveyed city in the world. So on the day of 7/7, we should have lots of pictures of these guys all over the place, and we've had very, very few released, basically. And that, to me, obviously, is a kind of smoking gun. You know, no one else can get the CCTV cameras closed off. Only people with inside access can do that.
Right.
And we had the same problem, of course. And let's just talk about another thing that might be a staged event, and that's the death of Jean-Charles de Menezes, who died on the 22nd of July after 7/7.
Yeah.
Now, again, the cameras there, they tried to say the cameras weren't working, but London Underground said no, the cameras were working.
Yeah, right.
But now they seem to have destroyed the pictures, basically.
Lost them, yeah.
Yeah, lost them or whatever. So we always have this problem of saying that's becoming a kind of a key thing to look out for in the modus operandi, that the actual CCTV isn't working. A bit like we've got to look out for kind of terror drills as well. Exercises always seem to take place around these things as well, as it does with Sandy Hook, as it does with the Boston Marathon.
Right. OK, now, Dave, do the people of England want or need these events? Is it some emotional need that the state has to cater for? Do people want fear and terror to guide their lives? I find the majority of nearly everyone totally believes these events, totally believes there's this fiendish Al-Qaeda menace lurking, totally believes that even Muslims, that there are extremist Muslim terror groups always doing these things. Is it the case that people in England need and want this fear and terror, which the state then has to provide?
No, of course not. They don't want this kind of fear and terror, but this is all part of keeping up the surveillance state, essentially. I think that the authorities have never been so scared of genuine revolt in this country, and in fact across the world. The wiser people are obviously seeing that what the societies we're living in, the people ruling us, are not the politicians we elect. There are people behind the scenes. That most obviously is the bankers who control the money supply and therefore control the economies of societies. But to keep all that kind of rule up, you need to have something to keep the state of fear up, and that's both a thing about obviously increasing the budget, keeping the budget up for the intelligence services, but also just keeping the general state of humanity in what we as spiritual people would call lower vibration. People who live in fear, when the fear is a very low vibration, so it doesn't interact with the DNA. People who live in love, when it's going up and down like that, it's constantly lighting up the DNA, and you go on an upward spiral. Your DNA gets lit up, your consciousness expands, and you see through the bullshit, basically.
Yeah, but politicians today don't have any hope or better vision of any society that they can offer us. They don't seem to have any idea of what it means to be human, or the faintest inkling of how this country could possibly live without war, do they? I mean, it's taken for granted there is an enemy, we have to fight the war, and are not these fabricated terror events put there to make sure people keep on believing in the war and paying taxes for war?
Yeah, absolutely. It's there, obviously, I say, to keep up the whole intelligence service budgets, keep up the surveillance state, keep up the control mechanisms, all these things they need to do to keep society under control, basically. There can be no doubt about that, because, I say, if these things were true, they'd be able to provide the evidence, and they can't. You know, and it's a bit like when we go back to Woolwich. The car doesn't seem to have actually hit the sign they show, basically. I mean, when you see the pictures, it's not actually up against it. People say, oh, perhaps somebody moved it, but if they did, why hasn't it knocked the sign out slightly? Why doesn't the paint leave some sort of paintwork on the actual stanchions, basically? We see none of that at all.
Exactly, yeah. So this is a very bad street theatre with the car crumpled up without anything that could have crumpled it up, without any blood in the right place, and with these strange killers who, after they've allegedly hacked somebody's head off, just stand around waiting and talking to people, and somehow they have no fear that the army, which is just over the just a wall, literally by the side of Artillery Road, it's the Artillery Road barracks. Why weren't the army storming out after they've heard their man was killed? So isn't this a badly designed terror event which ought to be totally lacking credibility?
Well, that is almost the issue we've got to, is that they don't even seem to be doing this particularly well anymore. I mean, I didn't think the original 7/7 picture of the guys outside Luton was done particularly well. That they looked like they were trying to show certain people that was a fake. And the same thing that comes out of this from the Sandy Hook massacre, the DSS records in the US, the Social Security records, when someone dies, it's registered in a public document. Yeah. And the one for Adam Lanza is dated the 13th of December. The guy who's supposed to have carried this out, the 13th of December, the day before the attacks. Yeah. Now, people have said there's also Facebook things, appeals and so on that predate the attacks. They've tried to claim that's something to do with some fault in computers, but people have checked these things out with source code and so on. They clearly had sites already up expecting the Sandy Hook massacre to happen.
Well, what puzzles me most about these events, David, is the complete absence of investigative journalism. I mean, what happened to it? The Telegraph, the day after Woolwich, did publish an article saying that absolutely nothing in the story made sense. And that was all. It didn't go further and hint, well, perhaps it wasn't true, perhaps none of it happened that way, perhaps the story was completely bogus, and wouldn't you expected British journalists to, for example, try and find the bus driver? Why did he stop his bus in that impossible position right immediately after the traffic lights?
Never mind the bus driver. What about the guy who's supposed to have shot the picture of Michael Agyebo going on and on? He's not identified. He phones into it. He's supposed to phone into a radio programme. He's called Jamie. But we have no proper identification of that guy. Right. There's other people we know taking pictures from the flat we see of the shootings. They haven't been identified. Right. There is nobody who is named and identified who claims to be a witness to the actual beheading itself. All people come along afterwards and say, oh, we saw the crashed car and we saw this, and they're on camera, but they're not interviewed. And a bit like the women at one point who are seen to look around the dead body and sit next to it. As far as I'm aware, they haven't been interviewed either. So
I think one of them has been identified, actually.
So the one that went up to her and challenged him was, she was, but there was another couple there who don't appear to have been identified either. So,
and likewise, the guy who was the guy driving the huge white lorry. I mean, he should have been arrested and questioned. He's sitting there all the time, blocking out the CCTV camera. And most of us will say that white lorry is pretty damn obviously where the crumpled-up car was taken out from. Why wasn't he arrested? The car that was trashed, why isn't there any investigation of who it belonged to? And was not the whole street clearly sealed off beforehand because there's no traffic at all? And if so, who did that? Why aren't any British journalists asking this stuff?
Well, I think you realise that journalists realise that their careers are very quickly curtailed if they start asking these difficult questions. And they do seem to have gone for a kind of recruitment policy across the board, in government, in MI5, in journalism, are the type of people who are in it for the money and don't want to challenge authority, basically. They may have...
that's terrible. It means we haven't got any newspapers worth reading in this country.
Well, that's absolutely true. We all know that from the past 16 years. I can certainly testify from my own experience about journalists either making up stories about me or exaggerating stuff or trying to discredit me because I blew the whistle saying that MI6 had funded Al-Qaeda, essentially. So this is a major problem, but what's an even bigger problem, as you say, is not so much journalists not doing that, it's the police not doing that. We don't have any witness signs up around there when you went there a couple of days later, did we, saying, we want witnesses at this event. Right. And you're absolutely right, because in a post-terrorist incident, what you do to start with is treat everybody as a terrorist until you can rule them out. And that goes obviously logical. You don't let people go and think, oh my God, we let a terrorist go. No. So that's the police modus operandi. You go in, arrest everybody. Somebody says, no, I just saw it. They checked that out. That's fine. You're not a terrorist. You can go. That's how it's supposed to work. And clearly it's not working that day in that way. It doesn't work that day on 7/7 either. I can remember in London in 7/7 there was no signs up appealing for witnesses. And it's again, we go back to 9/11, the same sort of thing again. The kind of investigations we should be having, like air crash investigations, forensications, reports and so on, are just not there.
Yeah, Dave, just one other thing a lot of people ask you about. 8 shots rang out dramatically with the Woolwich events. 8 shots at close range, shot by the police, and nobody died, alleged police. And somebody said they all sounded like blanks. Would you like to comment on this particular piece of street theatre?
Yeah, I mean, we get this from there's 2 different shots as well taken from the flats above. 2 subtly different angles, and that's a bit weird in itself. I mean, you've got 2 people looking out the same window, both with their camera phones on, or what? I don't know. That in itself is suspicious. Now, obviously, kind of come to firm conclusions here is difficult. However, the sound of those guns going off does not sound to me like bullets.
No, right.
You know, we see these things in films and assume that's the sound of a bullet. Anyone who's actually heard a bullet going off, it is extremely loud. Very, very loud. I went to a weapons familiarisation day with MI5. You could hear what it was like, even shooting a pistol or whatever. It's absolutely deafening racket, and that's not what you hear on those things. Right. You really don't. So yeah, we've got all sorts of problems like that. Again, there's a problem with the police car as well. Police cars have identifying numbers and letters on the roof of them, so that in situations you've got the helicopter above and they can identify which car is where. Now again, that car that's parked there, that police car that's parked when these two guys are shot, doesn't appear to have those identifying numbers on top.
It was all street theatre. Yeah. Okay, Dave. Well, I think that's give us wonderful insights from somebody who really knows what they're talking about, because you worked with MI5 and you've seen these things at quite close quarters. And I think here in Tavistock Square we'll wind that up for now. So thanks very much.
Cheers, thank you.